everyone. I am Nicolas Saint-Lay. I'm a developer for Odoo, and I'm mainly acting in the database layer around Odoo. So each time I give a talk, it's around the database layer in Odoo, and after each talk, I get a question which is, could we use another database than PostgreSQL with Odoo? And instead of answering with just one word, I will answer it with slides. So. What are the database purpose in the Odoo world? The database purpose with Odoo is to store and read objects and the dependencies of those objects in a fast, secure, and reliable way. That means when you read a record, you should be able to read a record and all the links from this record, let's say an order and the sales order line and stuff like that. You should do this as fast as possible. This should be secure, so if you store something in the database, you should be able to retrieve it correctly from the database. And it should be reliable. That means if the database say, okay, it's stored, then you should ensure everything is stored. At the end of the talk, there is a Q&A session, and there is a QR code you can scan, and that will lead you to a pad where you can ask your questions. So the first property of a database is the ACID property. ACID property means atomicity. Atomicity means transactions are composed of multiple statements. The atomicity guarantees that each transaction is treated as a single unit. So either everything succeeds or everything fails, but you don't have a small parts which succeed and a small parts which will fail. The consistency ensures that a transaction will bring the database from one consistent state to another consistent state. The isolation ensures that when you run multiple transactions at the same time, this will leave the database in the same state that if you have executed all those transactions one by one. That's the isolation property of a database. And the durability guarantees that once a transaction has been stored in a database, it will remain committed. Even if a system failure occurs just after the commit ensures that everything is okay with the database. You also have the MVCC, the multi-version concurrency control. It's a non-locking concurrency control method, which is commonly used by many database management systems to provide concurrent access to the database. In Odoo, we use constraints within the database. We use foreign key constraints in the database. We use foreign key constraints in the database because they are way more faster in the database rather than controlling this in Python. It's safer and faster. We use also unique constraints. So you would like to ensure that you only have one invoice for a given number. This could be achieved by an SQL constraints. In Odoo, we also use any kind of constraints you can define with SQL. So you are able in any class of Odoo to define a constraint which will be stored in the database and controlled by the database. The constraints you stored in the database are safer than the constraints you use in Python code. I can go deeper in this area if you want, but if we use another database than PostgreSQL, this database should be multi-platform. Odoo runs on plenty of platforms, and if you run Odoo with another database, your other database should be able to support all the Odoo and Python platforms we support. That means mainly Unix world, because we cannot deploy Odoo on production and on Windows, so this excludes the Windows. ecosystem, but you should support every platform. And by every platform, I mean every operating system or CPU. We support various types of CPU, so you should be able to support them as well. In the Odoo ecosystem on the database level, we also use indexes. We use the B-tree indexes. The B-tree indexes are the most basic index you can find in a database world. If in any database you create an index, there is a great chance that it's a B-tree index. We also use trigram index. What is a trigram index? In the Odoo ecosystem, when you search on a string, the search are done in your field contains this string. And for this kind of search, your field contains this value. The B-tree index are not usable at all. The database cannot use a B-tree index to retrieve information based on the content of a string in another. Instead of that, we use trigram index on the PostgreSQL world. So the trigram index each trigram contains in a string, and when you gave a string to search for, it split the value in different trigram and search for the match between the index content and the trigram you found in your search criteria. We use unique index. We use unique index in PostgreSQL for now because in PostgreSQL the unique constraints are implemented by a unique index. So if you want a unique constraints in PostgreSQL, you just have to define a unique index. And we also use partial indexes. Partial indexes are very important. They are very important because, first of all, you save space. Let's say you want to index any field and want to skip the inactive records because you have 80% of your table as inactive records. You can index only the active records with partial index. It's important to use only the partial index because if you save space on the disk, you save space in the cache between the operating system and the disk access. If you lower the index size, it's faster for the system to read all the index to retrieve information. The smaller the index, the better. If you are able to create an index which perfectly matched what you are searching for, and this index is very small, it will be even faster than creating the index for the whole table. Last but not least, if you lower the index size, you lower the backup size. This one is one of the most important requirements we have for a database system with Odoo. The transaction isolation level. The transaction isolation level is defined in Odoo as repeatable read. The transaction isolation level is what does the system see when it performs a query. You can have from the lowest one read uncommitted, so you are able to read data which are even not committed in the database, and you can go to the highest level, which is serializable. Serializable means each transaction is executed one by one. It's the safest and the slowest. Here in Odoo, we need the repeatable read. The repeatable read isolation level means if you execute a query within a transaction, if you re-execute the exact same query in the same transaction, you will retrieve exactly the same data, no matter what other transactions will do. Once you have started your transaction, you retrieve data, if you retrieve those data a bit later in the same transaction, you will retrieve exactly the same data. Why is it so important? Because one of the key performance of Odoo is putting data in the cache, in the memory, rather than retrieving them from the database. That means we execute a query in the database, retrieve the data, and store those data in the memory. So we have, at this point of time, the data in memory and the data in the database. No matter the way we will retrieve the data, in the database or in memory, we should read exactly the same data. Because the code will take business decision based on what you read from the data, either from the database or from the memory. The repeatable read isolation level guarantees that the system will act exactly as that once you have stored data in the database, in the memory. They are the same in the database. This is the key of the choice of a database. We also have we use some kind of loop detection in Odoo, and we use with recursive queries. So your database, if you choose another database than PostgreSQL, you should be able to handle those kind of queries. So now the question is, why would you like to change it? To be honest, I have a PostgreSQL sticker on my laptop. I'm a fan of PostgreSQL, so it was hard for me to find reasons to choose another database than PostgreSQL. So, the first argument is PostgreSQL. The PostgreSQL learning curve is a bit steep at the beginning. For a beginner, I should admit that seeing PostgreSQL for the first time is not the easiest database you can meet. There are other databases that are simpler to meet at the first time. Another reason to choose another database system is because you have a whole infrastructure with another database engine. Let's say you are running MariaDB and you have your whole infrastructure with MariaDB, and you say, okay, I want my application to run with MariaDB. Okay. And finally, I think this one is the most argument people think is, I would like to get rid of this. Could not serialize access due to concurrent updates. On the other side, why should we keep PostgreSQL? And here is the key. You have the various isolation level, and I said we are in the repeatable read isolation level. You have 4 disgusting situations when you read data from databases. And the one which is key is phantom read. Due to the way the repeatable read is implemented in PostgreSQL, it's not possible to face the phantom read. What is a phantom read? You execute a query from a database. Let's say you search for the order lines for the order 1, and you retrieve 3 lines. Another transaction, while your transaction is running, another transaction adds a new line to your order 1. If you re-execute the query, and if you face the phantom read, you will retrieve this new line. If you don't face the phantom read, you don't retrieve the inserted line. I've said earlier that it's key to retrieve data from database which are exactly the same as the ones in memory. If I read them once and I retrieve 3 lines, I store the 3 lines in memory, I cannot execute my query and retrieve 4 lines. If I re-execute the query, I should only retrieve the 3 lines I retrieved earlier. Because your code took business decisions based on those 3 lines. Let's say the 4th line is the delivering costs. You are executing code, which is checking if there are any delivering cost. There is not, I will add them. You cannot say, okay, there is not, I will add them, and oh, there are. No, it's not possible. You can do that. If you want to avoid having 2 delivery costs on your sales order, you will have to act with Python constraints, SQL constraints, whatever, but not lowering the isolation level to retrieve the new lines. The repeatable read is also the culprit for the error message serialization error. Both transactions start at one point in time. They both read the exact same data from the database. One changes a record. The other one would like to change this record. It cannot because there is a lock, but if the first one commit is changed, the second one have read a data that is not valid anymore. You cannot alter the data because the data is not valid anymore. This is the serialization failure. This serialization failure is not an issue. The serialization error you see in the logs means the database protects you from losing data. Let's say you want to lower the stock value from 1 unit. You read 3 units in stock. If the first one lower by 1, it will set the stock to 2. If the other one have read 3 and would like to store 2, you would have lower twice the stock by once with a result of only 1 lowering. It's not possible. It's not safe. So to be safe, we should ensure that you read the data you have stored and you cannot alter data other people have stored. The other point is PostgreSQL is rock solid. You can search the net for people complaining about losing data in PostgreSQL. It's not mainstream. PostgreSQL is fast, really fast. When you face issues, we have solutions for the issues you are facing with the speed issues you have with PostgreSQL. The easiest one is the indexing of the database, and you can go to the hardest one, which imply table partitioning, synchronous replication, and database sharding and stuff like that. If you reach the PostgreSQL ecosystem, you will see that the PostgreSQL ecosystem is full of stuff. You need to take backup. There is an easy way to take backup from PostgreSQL. It's just a command tool that will act as a replication slave and will take backup and lets you lower the point-in-time recovery and the point objective, the recovery objective. You need to increase the size of your database. You need to take database sharding. There are solutions to make database sharding out of the box. You need to deploy your database in multiple locations in the world. There are solutions to deploy your database in various locations in the world. You need to configure your database. You just have to go on the net. You set the number of RAM and CPU you have, and you will get the correct configuration for your database. You want to go to the cloud? You are on Microsoft Cloud? You can run PostgreSQL on Microsoft Cloud. You want to check what is going on your database? You just have to launch a command tool and you see what's happening in your database in real time. You want to go to a bigger cloud, you can go by Google and you will deploy in one click the PostgreSQL cluster. And you can even try to reach the active deployment. If you reach this point and you achieve this goal, send me an email. So, based on that, should we replace PostgreSQL with another database engine? I don't think so, because PostgreSQL fully deserves what we need it from, and the installation base is very huge, so we can't replace PostgreSQL with another database. Should we support another database? No, the question is how to be efficient with two different systems. It's already hard to be efficient with one database system. We have plenty of examples in the code base of Odoo where we had to take choices, and those choices are based on decision we took. Let's say you were searching for a criteria where ID is a list of IDs. Should you set ID in a list of ID or ID in a subquery? There is no answer to this question, and we have only one database engine. For the constraints, when a constraint is violated in the database, PostgreSQL returns us the constraint name. Based on this constraint name, we are able to send to the end user a meaningful message. The ratio risk-win is way too bad to support another database. So for now, we will stick to PostgreSQL, as there is no plan to use another database than PostgreSQL. I think people have already tried to achieve this, but review all the requirements I've set, and you will conclude that you can only follow PostgreSQL for Odoo. If you have any question.
Thank you, everyone. I will go behind you. All right, there are 4 questions. Maybe there will come some more through. The first one is, what about PostgreSQL? Compatible cloud implementations like LODB for PostgreSQL, Google Cloud, or Amazon RDS, or Yugabyte database as a way to handle very large databases. Have they been tried and made to work with Odoo? Are they supported or recommended?
One of the key you have to stick to when you choose a database is the network latency between the Odoo server and the database server. You have thousands of round trip between the Odoo server and the database server for each transaction. So each millisecond you add in your network latency adds seconds in your response time for the requests. So you can try them. We don't have tried them as far as I know, but if you try them, ensure that the network latency is very low.
All right, thank you. Second question is, Odoo is only integrated with Postgre. How much effort would it take to integrate another database?
A huge effort. I don't measure the time it will take to use another database, but it's something like months of work for one guy.
All right. Why don't we use NoSQL database /troll Not sure what this means, but
Yeah, it's a troll.
oh, it is.
Yeah, it's a joke.
Thank you. um, do you have a special version of PG to use with Odoo, like a
Yes.
custom tuned?
No,
one?
there is not a custom PG version, but there is a minimal version of PostgreSQL you should use per Odoo version. Generally speaking, it's the version of PostgreSQL released with the last LTS of Ubuntu. It has been, I think, 12 up to now and 14 with the new version of Odoo. But it's not a custom one, it's the vanilla one, but with a minimal version.
And regarding the feature of replication of the database to move to read operations on the replicas,
Yes.
what is the delay of information, and is it possible to backport in Odoo v16?
It's not possible to backport in Odoo v16 because you have to mark all the controllers as read-only or not read-only. If you want to achieve it with Odoo 16, you have to act with some kind of load balancer to detect the route you are calling and say, okay, this route can be called on a read-only server, or this one cannot be called on a read-only server.
All right. And will Odoo integrate JSON-B more as current? Will we use full index of JSON-B
in
in domain search?
I'm not a fan of the JSON-B integration within the database, but I should admit that for some points it's fully deserved what it's used for. Let's say the translations, storing them in JSON-B really improve the performance of the database. When we are talking about property fields, it's different.
Okay. And is there a database retention automation in Odoo or PostgreSQL?
I don't understand the question, so I cannot answer.
Okay. All right. I think we don't have them all. Maybe this one?
Yeah. Any plans? No, there is any plan to... The question is, begin for relationship, any plans, IDs, commands? So that's the last question I will answer. No, there is no plan. And the reason is mainly we will lose space for no need.